Ever hear about the rock icon who loved yak milk? How about the acting legend who kept a mini-me on set? These stars and others didn't just embrace their weirdness, they took it to a crazy new level. In 1993, Prince changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol that married the common symbols for the male and female genders. This may have been a ploy to get out of a recording contract, but it was still a fairly eccentric choice of stage name. In the absence of better options, most people simply began calling him the artist formerly known as Prince. This strange choice was on brand for the musician, who had blazed a trail of sexy androgyny even as he struggled to reconcile his erotically charged stage persona with his religious beliefs.
I pray every night, and I don't ask for much. I just say thank you.
Prince had been raised a Seventh-day Adventist, and as an adult was associated with the Jehovah's Witnesses. This led him to occasionally take part in door-to-door evangelization, but also led to inconsistent opinions on sex and sexuality that alienated some fans and collaborators. Later in his career, he ejected some of his old songs from his active repertoire, partially turning his back on the sexiness that had helped him top the charts. Less controversially, Prince was a notoriously wacky eater, with tastes ranging from the kangaroo-themed snack Dunkaroos to yak milk, which he ate with his cereal. He also adored mustard, stocking his fridge with a kaleidoscope of foreign and domestic brands. His favorite mustard reportedly contained raspberries. Beauty may be subjective, but few would deny that young Marlon Brando was one of the most handsome men to ever grace a Hollywood screen.
Hey, Stella!
His beauty was matched by a natural acting style that some directors highly prized. If getting that face and that style meant dealing with the kind of person who once allegedly urinated on stage during a scene with Tallulah Bankhead, well, at least he was awfully pretty. Deceitful, mischievous, and promiscuous, Brando got away with it all based on his talent and looks. Brando aged into one of the most celebrated screen talents of his generation, and then out of it, with one of his final film roles as the title character in 1996's universally panned The Island of Dr. Moreau. The production admittedly ran into many problems, but Brando's antics were among the most disruptive.
Darling, goodbye. Goodbye.
Admittedly, he was still grieving the unexpected death of his daughter, but he nonetheless showed up in a muumuu with his face painted white. He squabbled with admittedly obnoxious co-star Val Kilmer and became fixated on a little person who was in the cast and had him dressed like a smaller Brando, ultimately inspiring Mini-Me from the Austin Powers movies.
No, we don't gnaw on our kitty. Leave Minnie Mr. Bigglesworth alone.
Brando's last credit was as the voice of a villainess in the unreleased animated film Big Bug Man. He showed up in full drag, filmed a day of lines, and died before the film was complete. Joan Collins has remained a topic of interest well past the point when many of her contemporaries have faded or passed away. That's partly because the experience of Joan Collins has remained intact and fantastic. Interviewers frequently come away with a tidbit of eccentricity, often connected to the maintenance of her famous beauty. For example, she insists on laying down with her face under cool cloths for at least 5 minutes before public appearances, and she won't sleep on her side for fear it crumples the face. Joan has also spoken openly about the reincarnation of her sister, romance novelist Jackie Collins, whom Joan suspects visits her in the form of flying insects. Joan has also been accused of being unsympathetic to victims of sexual harassment in public comments, in part because of her own no-nonsense attitude to men who tried to take liberties. She need them in the crotch. Magnificently, she's married to a man, her 5th husband, who is over 30 years her junior. Asked about the age gap, she simply said, "If he dies, he dies." Joan Collins in her 90s remains exactly Joan Collins, and what a gift to the world that is. If you name a baby Truman Streckfus Persons, you can't expect them to follow a conventional path. After a chaotic upbringing that saw, among other shufflings, Truman's adoption and renaming by his mother's second husband, Joe Capote, Truman became a literary sensation in his early 20s. He stood out not only for his writing, but also as a then-rare openly gay man whose behavior was as much a part of his fame as his prose. He spoke with an affected lisp, dressed boldly, and reinvented himself as a New York socialite. Capote loved to hobnob with the wealthy, cultivating friendships with people he thought were important. With his career never quite living up to its early promise, he turned from fiction and drama to true crime, writing the seminal In Cold Blood and developing an emotional relationship with condemned murderer Perry Smith. Speculation about Capote's relationship with Smith has run the gamut from cynical manipulation of a source by Capote to star-crossed love. The murderous Smith was certainly of a type with the violent men Capote often pursued. The success of In Cold Blood allowed him to throw a colossal party at New York's Plaza Hotel in November 1966, which in retrospect was the high point of Capote's life.
I think one has style and one doesn't, but style is oneself.
Addicted to alcohol, drugs, and unhealthy relationships, Truman spiraled, ultimately sabotaging his relationships with the influential and elite women of New York society with a gossipy article published in Esquire in 1975. Capote died just short of his 60th birthday in 1984. If you had to explain camp to a recent arrival from a far-off planet, you might begin with Ethel Merman. The big-voiced singer with the big stage personality, almost invariably described as a belter, absolutely shook the rafters of theaters up and down Broadway and 13-star turns in musical theater. She never quite had the same success in film or TV, however, as something about her had to be seen to be believed. Merman had a shtick, and it wasn't just for the stage. Once, when bored by another singer's performance, she audibly gargled her champagne. Her brief marriage to actor Ernest Borgnine floundered when he got traveler's diarrhea, and Merman, already annoyed at him for scheduling personal appearance gigs during their honeymoon, hid his medicine. In her memoir, the chapter My Marriage to Ernest Borgnine is a blank page. Merman stayed sassy to the end, appearing as a delusional lieutenant who thinks he's Ethel Merman in Airplane and releasing a disco album. Though she died in 1985, some say her bawdy ghost still haunts Broadway's Imperial Theater. Divine, John Waters' gleefully crass, stage-devouring muse, may have been the most influential drag queen that ever lived. Divine changed that art form so completely that it's hard to remember that before her, drag was dominated by staid performers often going by the term female impersonators. Divine was fat, weird, and raunchy, more misbegotten than Miss America, and her career made cross-dressing punk.
Filth are my politics, filth is my life!
Born Harris Glenn Milstead, Divine starred in several John Waters films, notching credits like Avatar of Obscenity Babs Johnson in Pink Flamingos, fame-crazed murderess Dawn Davenport in Female Trouble, and lovelorn divorcee Francine Fishpaw in Polyester. She shaved part of her head so there was more room for makeup and was boldly plus-size in a world that valued slimness in both its women and those who wore their clothes. Beyond working with Waters, Divine made forays into marginally more mainstream projects, recording a couple of disco singles, launching a cabaret act, and taking a stage part in a women in prison farce. Divine was about to guest star in an episode of Married with Children, but died suddenly from unexpected heart failure at the age of 42. Fortunately for queer kids everywhere, Divine had a cameo of sorts from beyond the grave as a key inspiration for the ferocious, full-figured Ursula in Disney's The Little Mermaid. Even more than being weird, Wendy O. Williams was cool. She was working in a radically erotic theater group started by Rod Swenson, and the two of them would go on to form the nucleus of the Plasmatics, a decidedly punk but also uncharacterizable band. The Plasmatics became notorious for putting on some of the wildest performances audiences had ever seen, with charismatic Williams at the front of the group. Props were blown up, smashed, or torn apart with chainsaws at Plasmatics shows. Williams also performed in daring costumes, including sometimes just clouds of shaving cream or black tape over her chest. On at least one occasion, she took the stage bearing visible marks of a recent police beating. Later in her life, she became a bit of a health nut and an animal rights activist. She took healthy food seriously and publicly lamented the amount of sugar in processed foods. Williams failed to transition happily to normal life after her star faded and died by her own hand in 1998. But her legacy lives on, as Williams had the rare honor of having a minor Super Mario antagonist, Wendy O. Koopa, named for her. Captain Beefheart was born plain old Don Vliet in Glendale, California, upgrading his name to Don Van Fleet before coming up with the Captain Beefheart stage name. He was a talented visual artist even as a child, and was high school friends with fellow eccentric rocker Frank Zappa, working with Zappa on a rock opera. Beefheart formed a band, but without any formal musical training, was left needing his drummer to transcribe and arrange tunes that Beefheart would whistle or peck out on the piano. Band members later described this time as at best unpleasant, as Beefheart was not a particularly sweet or cooperative man, but the resulting album, Trout Mask Replica, became a peculiar cult success. Beefheart churned through backing bands and released music with Zappa, but by 1982 he had turned back to his original strength and left music behind to pursue visual art. He was not particularly suited to the working artist life. He refused to go to New York, in part because he thought there were a lot of skin flakes in the air, and audiences saw his work as meager efforts by a musician changing course. Reverting to his old name, Don Van Vliet, he was reclusive in his last years, often skipping his own art openings, stating that he was happier at home painting. Actor Crispin Glover has constructed a niche for himself as an out-there artist for whom the lines between the person, the actor, and whatever role he's currently playing blur. He's good at grabbing headlines for strange behavior, like the time he went on the David Letterman show and almost kicked the host in the head with a platform shoe.
I can kick.
Glover rewrote one character, the villain in the 2001 Charlie's Angels reboot, to be completely silent, using the money to invest in his own project and buy himself a 17th century chateau in the Czech Republic, the grounds of which he is stocked with peafowl. Despite the opulence his property implies, Glover has a history of objecting to the idea that money can buy happiness. He was reportedly so frustrated that the ending of Back to the Future implied that wealth would fix the McFly family's various woes, that when stock footage and prosthetics were used to replicate Glover's appearance in the sequel regardless, he sued, hoping to make it clear that he had nothing to do with the subsequent movie. Glover also seems happy to brush off his reputation for eccentricity. He clarifies that he is not, quote, psychotic, but he is otherwise seemingly content to make movies among his Czech peafowl and let the world think what it thinks. Icelandic musician Bjork is so known for her playful red carpet looks that she's at her most startling when her face is visible. We know what Bjork's elfin face looks like, but it seems rude to look directly at it. Instead, she seems most herself with her head covered in petals or spikes, in a fungus-like full-body contraption, or any of the other instantly iconic yet completely unreproducible looks she's worn over the years. Beyond the outfits, Bjork is as whimsical as they come, once accepting an award with the phrase, "I am grateful grapefruit." An Irish journalist reports arriving to interview Bjork to find the singer wearing a Miss Piggy mask, which she kept on throughout their talk. When the journalist woke up after a night of partying with the star in her entourage, he found that Bjork had gently placed the mask over his head as he slept, then left. Bjork pranked a larger audience in 2009 with a false announcement that she would be fronting Led Zeppelin. However, this was an April Fool's joke. The fact that Dennis Rodman grew 7 inches in college barely cracks the list of oddest things about the NBA star. An aggressive player and an absolute rebound machine, his unquestionable skill on the court was regularly overshadowed by Rodman's other exploits. He pitched hissy fits on and off the court, experimented with body art before it was common among athletes, and was briefly married to Baywatch babe Carmen Electra before staging a subsequent wedding to himself while wearing a full white gown.
I'm all of both worlds here.
Rodman also made diplomatic waves with his attempts to befriend reclusive dictator Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader who regularly threatens world war. Rodman first visited Pyongyang in 2013 and apparently bonded with Kim somehow, later referring to the man who killed his own uncle with an anti-aircraft gun as a friend for life. In 2014, Rodman even sang happy birthday to Kim in North Korea before a crowd of thousands. The United States has banned travel to North Korea and relations are now even colder, but perhaps Rodman can still get a card across the border.
You've gone jet skiing with Kim Jong-un?
Oh, yeah.
Shirley MacLaine has enjoyed a long and colorful career in cinema, playing a string of good-hearted sex workers in her youth, and later transitioning into sharp-tongued older women known for delivering lines like firecrackers. Not many performers have the range for the title role in Sweet Charity and the acidic Weezer Boudreaux in Steel Magnolias, but MacLaine made both roles her own. As a young performer, she earned herself a quaint footnote in diplomatic history by performing a sexy dance for visiting Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev claimed to be unimpressed by the decadent Western sleaze, but in pictures he looks pleased to meet a young Shirley MacLaine. Later in life, MacLaine became interested in broad-spectrum mysticism, exploring, writing about, and popularizing practices like meditation and out-of-body experiences. She wrote and spoke widely about these forms of spirituality, gaining herself dueling reputations as a mystic and a kook, while still attracting fans who wanted to meet Shirley MacLaine the star, not join the actress in her spiritual explorations.
That's the beauty in this philosophy and in what I think is the giant truth. Nothing ever dies.
MacLaine even produced her own takes on the celebrity exercise video, recording an audiobook of her guided chakras meditations and filming Shirley MacLaine's Inner Workout, which video stores could barely keep on the shelves after its 1989 release. In 1953, as his fame for Catcher in the Rye and 9 Stories was cresting, author J.D. Salinger instructed his agent to burn his fan mail and decamp to a rural hillside in New Hampshire, where he would remain for the rest of his long life. Salinger had tasted fame and apparently decided he wanted none of it, even quitting publishing after the mid-1960s. Unfortunately, the life of a hermit is interesting to the outside world, and Salinger never fully escaped others' interest, fending off regular attempts by outsiders to get a glimpse or a quote. Books published by an ex-lover and by Salinger's daughter allegedly reveal strange and sinister sides of Salinger's hermit-like existence. They describe an abusive husband with a perverse diet, eating frozen peas for breakfast and consuming his own urine. These works also reported a tendency to follow religious and spiritual fads, even from a secluded hideaway. Salinger even seems to have joined his fellow celebrities in going through a Scientology phase. The persona of Andy Warhol was, per Warhol himself, a straightforward creation, with no particular hidden meaning or complexity below the surface.
Most of my time is just to get up in the morning.
This may well have been the image he intended to project, but biographers and researchers have pieced together more nuanced views of the artist, who largely define the artistic world of the late 20th century. Shy and sensitive behind the veneer of superficiality, Warhol enjoyed lying about where he was born, claiming various Midwestern cities, even though Pittsburgh was his actual birthplace. He hired an actor to portray him at one event, and on a television panel show spoke only through his friend Edie Sedgwick. Warhol's dyslexia meant he found writing difficult, so he journaled almost obsessively by speaking into a tape recorder he nicknamed his wife. Researchers may listen to these tapes, but their transcription is forbidden until 2037. Domestically, Warhol didn't live in the opulent surroundings you might expect, but from 1952 onward, he did have his mother live with him, joining her for Catholic services and speaking to her in Rusin, a cousin of Ukrainian. While Warhol presented himself as asexual, he was interested in sexuality as a human activity, as is clear from his work, and a cache of erotic drawings from his early career hints at suppressed, deferred, or concealed desire. Tallulah Bankhead was always more of a personality than an actress. That's not to say that she wasn't an immensely talented performer, but the sheer magnitude of Tallulah the concept often overshadowed her actual achievements. The daughter of a one-term Speaker of the House, Bankhead loved smoking, drinking, and sex, and made no secret of it. Blaring details in a loud, low voice that earned her the nickname the Alabama Foghorn. Her pet parakeet even got in on the action after Bankhead taught it to share her champagne. As much as she loved sins of the flesh, Bankhead was also a principled woman, campaigning for politicians she agreed with, and after the fall of France in 1940, swearing off alcohol until the Allies reclaimed Paris. During the McCarthy era, she took a through-the-uprights approach. She hated both the communists and the McCarthyite witch hunters. On stage, she would do cartwheels when she could fit them into the script, and later raised eyebrows on the set of the Hitchcock thriller Lifeboat when she arrived on set without panties. Even as she succumbed to her seemingly limitless taste for booze and pills later in life, she never lost her self-awareness. Asked by passersby on the street if she was Tallulah Bankhead, her stock answer, according to The New Yorker, was, "I'm what's left of it, darling."
Go upstairs immediately and put on something proper.
Jackie Stallone, mother to Sylvester and his siblings, actually ran away to join the circus as a teenager in 1930s Washington, D.C., notching 2 years as a trapeze artist before taking a job as a chorus girl. In between 2 marriages and the birth of 3 children, she worked to promote women's athletics. This interest eventually drew her into the world of female wrestling, and she appeared on the original Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling in the 1980s. Jackie stayed active into her 90s, maintaining a trapeze practice schedule into her 10th decade. Stallone's interest in astrology was what eventually made her a minor celebrity, especially her own niche form of fortune-telling, rumpology, which is exactly what it sounds like. For Stallone, the cleft nature of the buttocks mirrors that of the brain, with features and textures of the posterior reflecting aspects of a person's life and fate. Left cheek for the past, right for the future. Stallone attempted to connect this practice to various ancient peoples, but seems to have been denying herself credit for coming up with one of the most peculiar forms of fortune-telling ever devised. Red Sox pitcher Bill Lee was so outspoken that he rapidly garnered the nickname Spaceman at the beginning of his career. A skilled player, Lee built his fame as much on his brash attitude and quick wit as on his athletic skills. He told a teen doctor that an X-ray artifact was an old Scotch bottle cap he'd swallowed, and announced that marijuana-laced pancakes made him invulnerable to air pollution. He kept his spark into retirement, comparing an aged rival to a duvet cover.
I see dead bodies. I'm like Bruce Willis in that movie.
Lee was known for being extremely personally loyal, once eating a $500 fine for walking out in protest when one of his friends was traded. This clash with management led to Lee being traded from the Red Sox to the Montreal Expos, where he finished out his major league career. Later, he wrote 2 memoirs, An Alternate History of the Red Sox, and features for both Sports Illustrated and High Times. In 2012, under a one-day contract with a minor league team, he became the oldest pitcher to win a baseball game, beating his own record from 2 years prior. Music scholars know Erik Satie as one of the forerunners of 20th century musical minimalism. Casual fans know him as a composer of the perennially popular Gymnopédies. Fans of the eccentric remember him as one of the weirdest men to ever place his hands on the piano. Satie's love of repetition and experimentation led him to write the seldom performed Vexations, the longest piano piece ever produced. It consists of a single musical phrase repeated 840 times. He may have been the first person to conceptualize background music, and he responded to criticism of his work as formless with a 7-part piece called 3 Pieces in the Form of a Pair. All this innovation came from someone who had flunked out of music school as a young man, only to return in his 40s. Outside of his music, he was also an odd duck. He humorously wrote about dressing in white and eating primarily white foods. He also carried a hammer for protection on his long walks to and from performances and apparently collected umbrellas. At his death, over 100 were found in his apartment. Lyndon LaRouche ran for president 8 times, though you could be forgiven for not immediately recognizing the name. The conspiracy theorist and general weirdo never came particularly close to the Oval Office, and though his followers occasionally snagged ballot lines, none rose to the level of genuine political influence. Despite his limited success, at his apex, his acolytes staffed 63 offices across the Americas and Europe. At the start of World War II, LaRouche received conscientious objector status because of his Quaker upbringing, before apparently changing his mind and joining the army anyway. Initially a Marxist, he veered right over the course of his adulthood, though in some ways his views defied conventional categories. According to LaRouche, Queen Elizabeth II was trying to kill him, and Henry Kissinger was a gay contract killer. Racist but opportunist, LaRouche had political marriages of convenience with both the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan, even though he allegedly thought the latter group had been set up by Jews. LaRouche hated modern music, and particularly rock, which for him was part of a British conspiracy infiltrating American life, and perhaps predictably considered climate change a hoax. He was equally willing to turn his ire on smaller targets, though, and accused the Leesburg, Virginia Garden Club of being a hive of communist agitators.